Majority Whip Western. Welcome to the House Corporations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I present to you House Bill 141. Provide a little bit of background on it. It's a good little bill. It's only about 3 pages long, but just to give you a little bit of context, obviously 2020 was an election season for us, and all of us were out campaigning, amongst our community members, showing up to events, knocking on doors, etc. And I know that there's obviously some folks who have talked about this issue for many, many years. But for me, the folks I really pay attention to and engage with are just kind of those average Joe conservatives, the ones that we all know, the ones we all represent, because those are the ones I think that I really try to listen to and engage with, because those are the folks that make our communities run and make our state run. And so one of the things I really just heard back from them when I would ask, hey, what are some of the issues that are on your mind these days? Quite a few said this party switching thing. And they said, I think it's time we button this one up and we get it taken care of and we put it behind us. And so that's kind of the genesis of this bill. Obviously I'm not going to go too far into the campaign stuff that went down in 2022, but obviously it was a very high profile campaign year, certainly at some of the statewide ones. And I think that had an impact. There are more folks who were engaged, who were paying attention, who were kind of asking some of these questions. And so again, when I talk to folks, certainly in my district, those average Joe conservatives that make our communities run, this was one of the things that they said that was on their mind. So that's kind of the backstory behind the bill and why it's here today. I will certainly note that obviously there's another bill before you that has basically the exact same language. And the reason that is that I think it was kind of more of a function of the left hand not talking to the right. This was something that I just had getting teed up, getting filed, and that's kind of the backstory behind that, at least that aspect. So with that, I will just, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, if it's okay if I just go into the bill and kind of walk us through it.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So obviously, we start there right there on page 1. We are amending Title 22, Section 5. And if we look right there, Title 22, Section 3, Chapter 15, Roman A, a registered elector's registration shall be canceled for any one of the following reasons. And you can see that we are amending Romanet 6 upon the written request of an elector at any time except for the period for which party changes are prohibited as specified in 22.5.114. I'm happy to go into that one. If you look at 22.5.114, it just says—
What is that statute?
That is 22.5.114, Mr. Chairman.
214?
214.
Is that the filing period? Is that what that is?
That's the change in party affiliation in Title 22. The filing period is that's 209.
Oh, gotcha.
22.5.209.
Oh,
214.
That's on page 3, line 4.
Correct. Yeah, I'm just kind of going through the bill in sequence right there at the top of page 2.
Okay.
And it says an elector may change his party affiliation by completing an application signed before a notarial officer or election official and filing it with the county clerk, not less than 14 days before the primary election or at the polls on the day of the primary or general election or when requesting an absentee ballot. So that's what we're mapping to right there in section in 115, where again, this is just cancellation of the registration. Not the switching, not re-registering, any of that stuff, just simply the component when it comes to the cancellation of your voter affiliation or registration. Going on down to page 2, 22.5.212, when declaration of party affiliation is required, that's just simply saying, hey, this is when you do have to declare in the event that you are not declared at the moment when you go to vote. Elector requesting a majority party ballot shall declare or change party affiliation or change party affiliation in accordance with 22.5.214 before receiving a party ballot. An elector may vote only a nonpartisan ballot, and if so, is not required to declare his party affiliation. Requesting a partisan primary election ballot constitutes a declaration of party affiliation. A change in declaration of party affiliation shall be in accordance with the requirements of 22.5.214. Shall be entered the poll list by the election judge. And so this is, Mr. Chairman, we kind of keep going down to the bottom of page 2, 22.5.214. This is kind of the meat of the bill, where a declaration or change in party affiliation, and that change component is key here. It just simply says for a primary election, an elector may declare or change party affiliation by completing an application signed before a notarial officer or election official and filing it with the county clerk clerk before the first day on which an application for nomination may be filed under 225209. And so again, that's an important one. And I've got it pulled up here. Oh gosh, I thought I had it pulled up here. Where is it? The 209 states an application for nomination shall be filed not more than 96 days and not later than 81 days next preceding the primary election. So that's just simply saying, Mr. Chairman, that if you kind of do the math, obviously our primary Tuesday is always the third Tuesday in August, so it's more on the day of the week versus it is the specific date of the month. But if you kind of do that 8196 figure and kind of do the backwards math, if you will, and back into that figure, really it's that filing period that starts right around May 13th, 14th, and goes through right around May 29th or 30th, give or take a day or two. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously, then of course the effective date. So I know this is a topic we all know and are familiar with, and I'm certainly happy. Any questions the committee may have?
So there's two elections and two different requirements depending on the election. For a general election, if I want to change my party affiliation, I have to do it not less than 14 days before the general election.
Correct.
And in a primary election, if I want to change my party affiliation, I have to do that before the filing period for candidacy.
Mr. Chairman.
Starts or ends?
Before it starts.
Or it starts.
So again, right around that May 13th, 14th, if we're looking for a specific date, generally.
And then let's say that I voted in a primary election and I chose not to vote in the general election, so I was purged. I fell off the voter registry. Is there anything in this bill that stops me from showing up on the same day of the primary and registering to vote again?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, the door is closing. Mike, could you say that one more time?
So if I voted in a primary election in 2022, and then I did not vote in the general election of that same year, so I was purged, I fell off the voter list, I'm no longer a registered voter. 2 years later, let's say that I was a Republican, and I've changed my mind, I want to be a Democrat. Can I now show up on election day in August, 2 years later, and register for the first time?
Mr. Chairman, assuming that your clerk did go through the purge process of those voter rolls, yes, that is correct.
Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. On page 2, the first 4 lines, it says that you can't decide you don't want to be a voter. So what if I decide I'm moving maybe to the state to the north of us, and I'm not allowed in that time period to say I don't want to be a voter in Wyoming? So I'm still on the voter rolls in Wyoming. Am I allowed to be on the voter rolls in that state to the north of us? Would that constitute my ability to vote twice if I were allowed to register in my new state of residence? Or does this preclude me from registering in my new state of residence?
Representative Western?
Mr. Chairman, Chairwoman Newsom, I'm not super familiar with the Montana election code and election laws up there, but there's obviously a chance that they could permit. Again, I'm just not familiar with Montana's election code and when their registration requirements are.
Representative Newsom?
So it seems as though by not allowing me to be taken off the voter rolls in Wyoming within this time period, which is about 3 months, that then I would be not eligible to register to vote in a new state of residence.
Mr. Chairman, Chairwoman Newsom, so if you kind of go back to that paragraph you're referencing, assuming I'm understanding your question correctly on lines 1 through 3 on page 2, that just is simply referencing 225214, which is simply that 2-week period prior to a primary versus that 3-month period you referenced.
Additional questions, committee? All right. Thank you, Representative Western. Representative Harrelson? Head on down to the hot seat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. So before you, I'm bringing House Bill 103. So 141 and 103 are actually the exact same bill, mirrored. And so there's, again, maybe some miscommunication or misinformation through the LSO process in this. But one thing, kind of just give a little bit of a background with me and this party, political party affiliation declaration and changes or crossover voting change. So in 2020, whenever I ran, one of the things that I heard as well is, guys, this is an issue. And so in 2021, my first year in legislation, I ran this bill. The dates we've kind of worked through and changed some things as we've seen some of the issues with it. And this is kind of what was settled upon through that process. But in 2021, I was informed this isn't an issue. This isn't happening. That's what I was told. And then 2021, we did a little bit more work into the budget session, and we brought it on the Senate side. It did not make it through the process. Then 2022 came around, and it became a very obvious thing that that this is a process that is happening. People are doing this. They are moving forward with party change for the purpose of voting in the primary for a certain political affiliation other than their normal political affiliation. And so moving into this session, once again, it was an overwhelming drive by my constituents to say, hey, we need to address crossover voting. You need to talk about this once again. And I believe that the original conversation piece of we won't see this come forward because this isn't an issue. Obviously, we saw in the 2022 elections, this was an issue. And this is an issue that the people of Wyoming want us to address. So the prior rep has already gone through the bill. Again, they're mirror bills. And so the only thing that I will say if you don't mind, to answer Representative Newsom's question, this would not keep you from being able to register. You just at that point can't change affiliation, or at that point also, if you cancel yours, you couldn't re-register in the state of Wyoming after canceling it outside of it until you got out of that period, if that makes sense. So if I were to walk in and say, hey, I want to cancel my registration, then at that point, I couldn't register as a different party inside of that period of time. But you could cancel and move to a different state. So I don't believe, from what I heard and what I've talked with those involved, that this would keep you from being able to register in a different state. So, and with that, I would stand for questions.
Representative Haraldson, one of the things that I find interesting about this bill is we have to figure out what is the right cutoff point for a prohibition on a change in party affiliation. This bill would say that before anyone files for office, so before we even know who the candidates are, you have to make a choice on which party you're going to affiliate with. Help me understand how that's good for the voters if they don't even know who's running for office. Is that just too? Is there any? I mean, if you change it by 2 weeks, you can still have a pretty lengthy prohibition, but at least allow people to know who the candidates are. Help me understand that logic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to answer that question, Mr. Chairman, so this really is a policy decision. Because what we're finding is the concept here that I think people are wanting addressed is, do your ideologies and your I guess I would say morals support one party or another? Because obviously, if we're being very honest, the two parties in question in this conversation have very much different viewpoints on many different things. And so what they're saying is most people don't in the course of a day sit there and say, well, you know what, I'm going to go away from that platform that I believe in to change to a different platform for that vote. And so this here is eliminating the popularity contest. This isn't about, well, my buddy decided to run, and so now I'm going to switch so I can vote for my buddy.
And this only applies to major parties then? When you said two parties, this only applies to major party affiliation changes?
So, Mr. Chairman, no, this would apply to more, but the reality is the major parties is where the conversation was birthed out of.
So if I am a staunchly conservative Republican and a very moderate to liberal Republican files and a constitutional or a libertarian party member files, and I might actually affiliate closer with them on not on the party spectrum, but on the political spectrum, I'm already locked in at this
Absolutely.
time because I didn't know who the candidates were.
Absolutely.
And that's just a consequence
Yeah.
we have to deal with.
At that point, it is in this situation, where if it's a situation where we place that date at let's say the end of May or something like that, we then open it up to the conversation that it creates this opportunity for people to step outside of the party that they affiliate with and be able to sway elections accordingly. So what the original bill that we ran 2 years ago did not go back this far. And after a lot more conversation with constituents and also with other individuals, this 22-5-209 concept, using that date for the filing start date as the date that would close party change, was rested upon. And really, we have a policy decision today because the next bill we hear on will have different dates. But this date is the date that overwhelmingly I have heard as I've talked to people in my district as well as others, that this is the date that people are seeking out and looking for. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chairman?
Committee, additional questions? All right. Thank you, Representative Haraldson.
Thank you very much.
The third bill we have, House Bill 207, change in party affiliation. Representative Zwanitzer, you're on deck. Your bill is a little bit different. Not a third copy of, we don't have 3 copies.
No, Mr. Chairman, it is not.
Okay.
And I think thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Always great to be back in front of this committee. So just some quick background. The legislature has been wrestling with this issue of crossover voting since at least the 2014 election. I think most of you are familiar with that. The drumbeat gets louder, the cry gets louder about we got to do something. And I think this last primary election season, 94% of the state voted in the Republican primary. Certainly an issue there. And knowing the history of this issue, because those of us who've been here a while longer know this topic has not ever successfully met the finish line. So what I'm attempting to do is a very small step to say we've done something, because we've kind of had this all or nothing approach now for the past decade. So this, at simplest, what my bill does is say if you're a member of one major political party, you cannot switch over the day of the primary or within 14 days. It does, however, still allow independent candidates, or unaffiliated voters, I guess I should say, independent or what we would call unaffiliated or minor party candidates, as to your previous example, Mr. Chairman, to be able to still ask for a primary ballot for the partisan primary election. So that's only the change I'm doing, is to not allow one major political party to switch over and vote in the other major political party's primary. Happy to answer any questions. With 14 days.
Within the 14 days. They can do it outside of the 14-day period.
Correct, Mr. Chairman, and I am personally not wed to that 14 days. It's just kind of the break we have in the old days with getting the poll books together and getting the reg stuff out to the precincts in the old days for some counties. At least from my constituency in my part of the state, I hear overwhelmingly maybe the opposite, that people do want to know who's on the ballot before they decide which primary they want to vote in. And
Your bill would allow for that no matter what affiliation I am, minor or major party. I get to at least see who files for office in May before I make up my mind.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. But if the committee did want to extend that 14 days to
30.
45 days or, 2
45.
weeks after the filing period, whatever it might be. I do think there's some personal responsibility when people do need to make a decision. But I do think sometimes you know a candidate and then you watch their antics and read their campaign materials and decide you don't want to vote for that person. And you might want that window to fully investigate candidates before you decide. I would also say real quickly, Mr. Chairman, this is the bill that the House of Reps passed out in 2019 is what I went from. It was at least agreed upon at that time in the body that we should do a small step. It didn't get heard in the Senate that year, but it's basically a resurrection of our 2019 bill, I think brought by Representative Blackburn with some amendments that we passed out of the House.
Representative Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Zwanitzer, so would it make sense to put the change congruent with another date, i.e. Absentee ballots 45 days before? Would that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chadwick, there are probably 4, I could say, specific dates in the primary period about when the clerks have to do certain things. Federal government requires some overseas voters, ballots to be sent. So yeah, the 45-day would be fine, or in congruence with when absentee ballots can be elected would be fine. So I mean, if you're asking logistically, is that workable? Certainly it is. And does it make sense? Certainly it does. That's still that part of an ideological position of when you believe this date should be set. But I think that gives people, in my mind, that 6 weeks notice to be able to know who's on the ballot, to explore hopefully a web page or a flyer by that point and make a decision. So I would be totally amenable. This was asked for last summer, even before the primary happened, the election, knowing this would be an issue again, and saying I'd worked with the speaker that we got to do something and make a step forward here in our contentious political environment.
Further questions, committee, for Representative Zwanitzer? All right. Thank you, Representative Zwanitzer. Now we've got something to think about. Okay, we do have all 3 bills now out in front of us, and we will begin public testimony on these bills. Raise your hand if you're planning on testifying on this bill. Not too bad at all. All right, we'll go to the clerks. Come on up. Clerks, come on up. And we'll get to the Secretary of State's office and then the general public.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. And we have looked at all 3 of these bills. I believe probably the most sense would be to talk about the 2 mirror bills. Our concerns there are pretty much the same because they're the same bill. And another thing too, Mr. Chairman, we may have some clerks online. We had folks that were trying to be here today, and because of the weather and the roads weren't able to be here. So there may be somebody there that would like to testify as well from one of the clerk's offices. My purpose today is here to focus on the administration of Wyoming elections, and particularly on change in party affiliation. The clerks have had the opportunity to review this proposed legislation and would be able to administer it. A couple of concerns and impacts which have already been expressed before by the sponsors. The House Bill 141 and 103 will be a bit of a change for what is normally the business of the day for elections. The party changes that occur in mid-May for the August primary will be a significant change and will require probably some pretty heavy voter education for the public so that they aren't caught short if they decide that they want to make those changes. We're concerned a little bit also about the fact that about 39% of the voters nationwide are unaffiliated or independent or belong to a minor party, and they would expect to be able to declare a party at the primary and vote.
What was
at
that
the
percentage
primary.
again? I'm sorry.
39,
39%. That's nationwide.
yes.
Do we know what
nationwide.
it is in Wyoming?
I don't, but I think you may hear that after a
I
little while.
was just going to ask, is Just nod if you have that information, Mr. Secretary. Do you know what percentage of voters in the state of Wyoming are unaffiliated and or a minor party? Okay. It'd be nice to know. Thanks. It's on the website? It's on the Secretary of State's website. It's on your website, Mr. Secretary. But I'll let you find it if you don't mind. Go ahead.
Another concern that we have is also, that has been brought up before, concerning folks that would make any changes like in July. So they get ready to move, they cancel their registration, something happens, they're not able to register somewhere else. We're concerned about that possible disenfranchisement, some of those mechanics. And then another thing that happens also is that on election day, we have people that will go in and they are a member of a party and they pull that ballot and then they look at the ballot and realize the people that they want to vote for are on the other ballot. So are we going to allow those changes to happen, or are they going to have to vote the ballot that they've pulled? And that would be from one major party to the other major party. So mechanical thing that actually happens. And in small places, a lot of times people vote for their friends as opposed to their party. So that's where that would happen at. Otherwise, the only thing else that I have to let you know is that the County Clerks Association really has no position on this bill. But we, as I said, would be able to administer whatever you decide it is. And I'm going to look here really quick. I have some more statistics down on my stuff. And not to take any of the secretary's thunder, but the January 1st statistics out of the Secretary of State's office showed that Wyoming had 14% of its registered voters were unaffiliated voters. And that's a little over, well, it's about almost 33,000 people. So, Mr. Chairman, that covers 141 and 103. We have the same comments on both of those bills. As far as on House Bill 207, this would be the least amount of change to what our current practice is. So it would minimize confusion and probably need less education, but it would be less confusion for the voters. It would also allow the unaffiliated and independent and minor party people to go to a major party at the primary election, which is that unaffiliated number. And also the notations that were to be made in the poll book, we would be able to gather statistics on actual crossover in the state of Wyoming as opposed to guess at it. So we could gather some of that information for the future if we wanted to change and make our laws, some more different or more restrictive as far as that's concerned. And that's basically the only thing I have to say about 207. Again, we have no position on that bill. However, we are able to administer these bills. So, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Committee, Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question related to my former question. So if I were to move from my county that has 2 number 1s on its license plates to the county that only has 1 number 1 on its license plate, would I have to stay with the same party affiliation if I moved from Cody to Casper?
If it was during any of these times of cutoff or restriction of changes, you'd have to stay with your party. Yes, ma'am. And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Thank
to
you.
the senator or to the representative.
Representative Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Langford, so if we changed the primary to 45 days instead of the 14 days in 207, do you see that presenting any kind of issues for the county clerks? Please comment.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chadwick, no, 45 days would be fine because that's where we begin the UOCAV overseas absentee voting. Absentee ballots come out right now at 45 days. So the election would be in swing at that point in time, but any time prior to 45 days ahead would be okay.
Committee, additional questions for the clerk's office? You answered my big question, which was just simply whether the clerks would be able to administer whichever bill advanced, that they would be able to administer whatever the case is. That's the most important thing to me, so.
Mr. Chairman, and that's correct, we can administer any of these.
Perfect.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you. I know Julie Fries is signed up online, but the comment I have listed for her is that as needed. So it sounds like, Ms. Fries, unless you have testimony to add, maybe you're just hanging around waiting to see if we have questions for you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Julie Fries. I'm sorry, again, my camera's not fixed. Maybe with our ARPA money, I could get another computer. Mary covered it very well, and I think I'm here to answer any questions if they come up on that. And as Mary said, that we can handle it at wherever it's at in the statute. I think it's going to be a big educational thing for the voters. And I was going to say too, that I asked my staff of how many people came back and changed their party. I expect maybe a mad exodus of that, and not a lot of them did that. So that was a little bit surprising to me. And a lot of people did tell us for the first time specifically why they were changing over. And I will say there are still a lot of those people out there that are changing over because they want to be involved in the process. Once the primary election gets over, they don't feel like there's a lot of way that they can participate. So there's the both sides of that. And that's the only thing I wanted to add to it, but I'm here to answer any questions as well. Thank you.
Committee, do you have questions for Clerk Fries? Okay, well, thank you, Clerk Fries, for tuning in with us. And if we have any questions as we move along, we'll certainly let you know. Okay, let's go to our Secretary of State's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, I am Chuck Gray, Wyoming Secretary of State. To my left is Joe Rubino, our General Counsel, Chief Policy Director, and to my right is our Chief Deputy, Jesse Naaman. Today I ask that you vote in favor of House Bills 103 and 141, which are identical and which will curb the practice of crossover voting in Wyoming. As we have seen over the past several election cycles, crossover voting has undermined the sanctity of Wyoming's primary process. Allowing people to change their party affiliation up to the day of the primary election and then change back dilutes our primary system. It creates incentives for individuals who do not share a party's values to nonetheless prevent voters of that party from electing a candidate that represents the party's platform by crossing over for a day, diluting their voice. By contrast, closing this loophole will allow members of each party to pick a candidate that represents the voters of that party, disincentivizing these tactics by requiring voters to affiliate before the election season starts. Thus, it allows both parties to put forward a candidate which truly represents their party's membership. For this reason, I stand in full support of House Bill 103 and 141, identical bills which prevent electors from switching parties after the first day on which an application for nomination may be filed, or 96 days before the primary election. This deadline, which is approximately 3 months before the primary, prevents voters from gaming the system by holding them to commit to a party before candidates formally declare, rather than allowing voters to wait and cross over if they want to vote for one particular candidate. Republican and Democrat majority states alike have wrestled with this issue, and many states' solution has been to close this loophole. I've heard the argument before that there are constitutional concerns with this, and I anticipate that possibly being put forward in public comment. And I just want to be clear that that has not been how this has played out on the ground. Numerous other states have closed primaries by statute with varying durational requirements for an elector to have affiliated prior to the election in an effort to prevent same-day crossover, and those have survived any scrutiny. New York requires a voter to commit to a party over 4 months before a primary election. Delaware has a 4-month deadline. Kentucky has a 5-month deadline. All have passed constitutional scrutiny. So it's reasonable deadline when you look at other states' practices. Second, these two bills, 103 and 141, accomplish what other attempts at ending crossover voting do not. Under current Wyoming law, a voter can switch parties by canceling their voter registration at any time and simply re-registering at the polls on election day as a member of the party of their choice. While House Bill 207 has this 2-week restriction deadline, House Bill 207 does not prevent a voter from canceling the registration and simply re-registering as a member of another party on election day, while 103 and 141 do close the loophole. It is also pivotal that there is enough time to have a real primary process, and setting the deadline at the start of the filing makes real sense. I don't think 207's deadline of 2 weeks is sufficient, especially because the poll book closes 14 days before. I mean, in practice, what you're really doing is just preventing crossover on the day of the election. There's some discussion about whether it should be the end of the filing period, the start. I mean, here's the thing. I think whether you're going to pick May 15th or whatever day that is, or June 1st, I mean, I think, whatever it is, I don't think it should go past there. And the other thing I would say too is I prefer the start of the filing period as the deadline, because I think your party affiliation membership really transcends who the candidates are. It's about what that party stands for, what the platforms are, which is published there in the beginning of May, because that's when the party conventions culminate. Finally, I will say that the people of Wyoming unequivocally want a common sense solution to the problems crossover voting has posed. I can tell you, having traversed this state 30,000 miles in 3 months, this is the number one thing I heard about in relation to our election procedures. It is time we make positive steps towards ending it. For these reasons, I urge a yes vote on either 141 or 103, those identical bills. I also want to answer some of the questions that were posed. We ran the numbers on, I don't know if, I don't have an internet connection down here, so I asked one of our folks upstairs to do it, but we have 10.8% either unaffiliated or minor parties, 9.8% unaffiliated, 0.2% Constitution, and 0.8% Libertarian, if you want them broken off. And then answering Representative Newsom's question that was asked earlier about what would happen in another state, registering in another state presumably would trigger 22-3-115 Romanet 5, which is a cancellation of your voter registration with a notification coming from another state that you've registered in another state. So that's an answer to that question. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Appreciate you answering that question as well. Representative Knapp?
Mr. Chairman, Secretary, so on 103 and 141, how do you view the minor parties as being part of that process as well?
Secretary
Mr.
Gray?
Chairman, the way I read the bill is that if you're requesting a major party ballot, so yeah, they would be subject to these bills, and I think that's a fine policy choice. I mean, I think it's just like opting into unaffiliated. I mean, it's so I think it's the same situation. I mean, it's not the same result, but it's the same situation of you opting into where you're at that particular point in time. So I think the way it reads is fine.
Additional questions for the Secretary's office? Okay, and if I understood your testimony right, whether it's May 15th or June 1st, June 1st would be the kind of the last cutoff in your mind, if we were to.
Of
scale
what
that
yet? Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I like the way it reads now, which is about May 15th, right? It's the first day of the filing period. I always say it's May 15th, and you know how that goes. I mean, the way the statute reads, sometimes it goes into June, but the way I think about it from 30,000 feet up is it's May 15th to the conclusion of May, and some years that's the way it goes. I really would start to get more nervous if you go past June, but I like the May 15th as I think that's the best. But I would say second best is June 1st. You start getting to the July, that's really when I think you're really diluting it. a lot.
Okay,
Um,
all right. Representative Newsom?
So maybe this has been asked at a prior time. So what are the numbers of people that have changed their party affiliation and then immediately changed back?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we ran that 4 years ago on the 2018 cycle, and it was extensive. I'd have to get you the percentage. I actually asked for that when you were asking your question, so we should have that aggregated by the conclusion of the meeting. If you want to call me back up, I'm going to run up and get that. The 2022 cycle has not yet been run, those numbers.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Public comment?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we do have that in our memo from that study from 2018. We had that in our materials.
Okay.
It was 12,509 persons changing their party affiliation between July 6th and September 20th. This was in the 2018 cycle. So 6,057 Democrats changed to Republicans, 4,355 unaffiliated changed to Republicans, and then 744 unaffiliated changed to Democrat, 477 Constitution and Libertarian combined changed to Republican, 430 Republicans changed to Democrat, and then 296 persons of various parties changed to unaffiliated.
Representative Newsom?
And did they change back, is my question?
Yeah,
Or did they stay?
Mr. Chairman, this was a very exhaustive study and that was conducted over many months, and they never did that analysis on the change back.
Mr. Chairman?
Follow up?
So we don't know if people change because they align with whatever party from, especially from unaffiliated to another party. So we don't know then if they stay or if they change back. We just know that they changed at some point.
Mr. Chairman,
Secretary Gray?
the numbers are from July 6th to September 20th. So it would have a portion of that change back period, right after the primary. But even if you had the number, I mean, getting into somebody's head and getting into their intent would be impossible. But, we have it from July 6th to September 20th.
Thank you, Secretary Gray. Public comment? Welcome, Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I just want to start right off with my members' policy as voted on by the members is to not have party changes the day of the primary. In some precincts, according to my members that worked those elections, it got overwhelming. People switching from one party to another and then switching back. So looking at the three bills that are in front of you, the first two, House Bills 141 and 103, meet that requirement. The question becomes, that's before the filing deadline, do you know who the candidates are? That's a question for you folks. Is that the right thing to do? House Bill 207, if on page 3, lines 14 and 15, if it was struck out or at the polls on the day of the primary or general election, that bill would also meet my members' policy. The decision that you folks will have to make. With that, Mr. Chairman, you know what my policy is. You know where I stand on these bills. I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Questions for Mr. Moline? Representative Ottman?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Moline, could you please repeat the change on 207
Mr. Moline?
Chairman,
that you would suggest? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, at least on page 3, line 14 and 15, where it says, or at the polls on the day of the primary or general election. So our goal is to not have people changing the day of the election. before is fine. And I believe we would also need to change on page 4, where it, on line 1, where it says, or at the polls on the day of the general election. Those would be, if those amendments were made, that bill would also fit my member's policy.
Okay. Further questions from Mr. Moline? Thank you, Mr. Moline.
Thank you.
Additional public comment? Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and esteemed committee members. My name is Jen Lowe. I am with the Equality State Policy Center. ESPC is a nonpartisan nonprofit that advocates for fair elections and transparent government. Let me be very clear here. Wyoming's elections are safe and secure. It is a testament to our 23 county clerks and the Secretary of State's office that 94% of Wyoming voters felt confident or very confident that their vote would be counted accurately in the 2022 election. Interestingly enough, 94% of voters also voted on the Republican primary ballot in August of 22. Before you today are 3 bills that deal with crossover voting. For those of you that are new to the committee, it is worth noting that voters are able to register or change their party affiliation on the day of the election because the state declined to participate in the National Voter Registration Act, also known as the Motor Voter Act of 1993. By restricting voters' ability to register or change affiliation on the day of an election, you may be in violation of Wyoming's exception to the act, and that is something to consider. ESPC is here to advocate for the voter. We believe that allowing voters to fully participate in elections is the right thing to do since they pay for them with their taxes. By imposing limits on a voter's ability to change their party affiliation before candidates file to run, you are effectively limiting their ability to make an educated decision based on all available information. Here in Wyoming, where we utilize partisan ballots in the primary election, the Republican primary is the most consequential election. This bill will incentivize voters to remain registered as Republicans so they can participate in the most important election. How will the parties react when 94% of voters continue to vote on the same primary ballot? Even with the crossover voting that occurred in August 22, the Republican candidate won by 37 points in the primary. Crossover voting happened, but did it have an impact? I thank you for your time today and for your service to the great state of Wyoming. I stand for any questions.
Committee, questions for Ms. Lowe? Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you elaborate on the Motor Voter Act and what restrictions we're under on that federal legislation?
Ms. Lowe?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, it is nice to see you again. Welcome back. So the Motor Voter Act was the National Voter Registration Act required states to allow voters to register when they got their driver's license. Wyoming and about 10 other states were exempted. 2 of the states had no requirements, and the other states all decided they would have same-day registration. So this applies to any race that has a federal election on the ballot. I'm not clear as to whether, I don't have a specific answer to if this will be in violation of that exemption or not, but I would expect that a complaint would be filed with the HAVA Help America Vote Act at some point.
At least in my reading, it doesn't matter any of the bills. I think all 3 of the bills, if I understand them correctly, allow a new voter to register on the day of election, which is what the motor voter law requires. So it's, the motor voter law doesn't say that you have a right to change your affiliation. It says you have a right to register. So I think same-day registration, even within the 96-day period, new registration is allowed, and especially same-day registration. Am I reading that wrong?
Mr. Chairman, I do believe you're right. I'm just not sure, are you also able to unregister and then re-register? I do believe that is where that the
see.
complaint or question would come in.
The unregistration. And what is it? 207 allows you to unregister and re-register, so 207 wouldn't be that problem, but you're indicating that 103 and 141 could have that issue.
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay, I'm tracking now. Committee? Additional questions for Ms. Lowe? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Public testimony. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman, Committee. Gail Simmons, Civics 307. I have a colored handout that was provided to you. I also sent it to you, or it was sent to you on email, and I can address some of the questions. So you know, Civics 307 and another nonprofit I'm on, which is Why Vote, is primarily interested in voter participation. And the point is that a constitutional republic, which is one of the types of democracy that we are under, really requires two things: competition and participation. And so those are the two areas that I spent a good deal of time actually doing analysis on. And most of what I've got on this presentation, actually all of it, actually originated from the Wyoming Secretary of State. This may not be new to Representative Yin because I update this on an ongoing basis. So the first thing, very quickly, you'll see is primary election participation. And I want to point out that this is showing a downward slope. So as our population is going up, our participation is going down. The second thing that you will find interesting on this is, with the exception of the last two cycles, what happens in our primary is on the cycle that is presidential, the participation goes down. And when it's the top 5 elected, it goes up. And I would propose to you that's because with the current process that we have, Republicans are exempted from the RNC from voting for presidential candidates because of timing. So there's very little incentive to jump in if you always look at the top of the ticket, because you're not going to see the president on there in the primary. Then when you go to the second page, which is general election participation, it's the exact opposite. So now we have an opportunity as a whole, and again, this is across all, we have an opportunity to vote for the president, and the participation spikes up. And then when we, on the gubernatorial, it goes down. And I would propose to you, that's because for the past close to dozen cycles, certainly last 10 cycles, the selection of our top 5 has been completed in the Republican primary. And so the incentive to vote in the general is decreased. So this is just about human behavior. So then if you go to the next, you'll see, and again, this I've presented many times before, and through you, Chairman Olson, to Representative Newsom, I actually wanted to address the question of what actually occurs, like facts, data-based, not supposition or fear-based or concerns, but what actually happens in our affiliation. So I first did this for 2020. I did it for 2018, can't find it, but 2020. And so what I did was I used the data on voter registration files from prior to basically the previous, what each individual, and I did this based on voter ID. So this wasn't aggregated data that I used. This was actually at the individual basis on voter ID. What was every single one of these individuals? What was their affiliation well before the primary? What was it on the primary? And what was it after the primary? So by definition, while it doesn't show same day, the clerks don't have the bandwidth to handle any volume of changes. So what you see here is the way these colors work. You'll notice that the number one change up in the top is from the unaffiliated, and the number in the bubble is the number of ballots that were cast in the primary of that affiliation. Of those, 1,261 had changed prior to the primary and voted as a Republican, and they stayed there. 107 of unaffiliated had changed and then changed back. So the number one change was a permanent change from unaffiliated to Republican. Number two, surprisingly, is a permanent change, 1,191, the red to blue, that was Republican to Democrat. And only on the third do you see the 1,026 who permanently changed from Democrat to Republican and stayed there. So the point that the data is showing is that, yes, there is change in affiliation because humans will do that. But you notice that only 3% of the individuals of the 105,000 in the Democrats, in the Republicans, actually came from a different affiliation from what they were prior to the primary. And it was 8% for the Democrats. So it's occurring, but it's occurring at a very low level. And as was pointed out by the previous, it's actually not changing the outcomes. So now we get to 2022 and the feud between a former president and a now former congressperson. And the impact that that had, that I can show very clearly on what happened. So now what the major party has feared all along actually did occur. It's an anomaly, but it did occur. So now you see that 9,181 people who had been registered as Democrat before changed for the primary and stayed as a Republican. And only 3,307 changed from Democrat to Republican and changed back. So this is really critical in order to understand these. So that fear that has been driving all of these bills, regardless of what the facts were, actually now have facts that show that for 2022, it occurred. And yet, I'm about to show you that it didn't have an effect on the outcome. I want to point out on the next one on primary participation. So what I did was I just took the Dems in blue, the Republicans in red, and the green is overall, which includes the unaffiliated. And there's some really interesting things here. So if you look at between 2020 and 2022, what you see is that the total number of registered Republicans increased by 65,000 people from 2020 to 2022. And again, this came directly from the compiled numbers off of Secretary of State's office. At the same time, there was a decrease of Democrats of 13,000. So you could make the case that of the 65,000, perhaps 13,000 of them were because of Democrats who changed to be Republicans. But here's what's also very, very critical to see. We had an increase in participation from 98,000, and this is in the first row of red that voted in 2020, that's ballots, that went up to 171,000. So a huge increase in participation there. But then look at the non-participation. These are the people who are registered as a Republican who do not vote in the Republican primary. And they overwhelm, even in 2022, the number who stay home and do not participate overwhelm any that change. In this particular case, the number that stayed home went from 59,000 up to 63,000. And because of the increase, that's actually a decrease in the percentage that stayed home. But it means that in 2022, those people that were successful in the Republican primary were successful with no more than 73% of the registered Republicans. So I think this is very important to understand. So I said that it doesn't make a difference, and to prove that. So if you go to the next page, what I'm showing here is I actually went in again from the official results, and I took for the office, and I took both Republican and then I took Democrat, and I took the total number of undervotes, the total number of ballots, and the percentage of undervotes. Only 846 people who picked up a Republican ballot in August of this past year failed to cast a vote for U.S. Congress. This is unsurpassed in terms of people making that. And so that 0.5% means that the people who showed up or absentee, regardless of what their affiliation was a year before or a month before, they voted for Congress. And then you go down the ticket and you see that percentage increase. Governor, 4.4, Secretary of State, 8.4. Auditor was not a competition, so people just didn't vote because, well, why bother? And it kept increasing until you get to superintendent, which was hotly contested, and it goes down to 15%. I went through all of the Senate races. I went through all of the House races, and basically at a level that all of you were at, 15% of the people who got a Republican ballot did not bother voting for the candidate, any of the candidates. The Democrats, on the other hand, when they do vote, they vote much higher. So the point is that it is people who are driving the participation. And as to Republican, I actually went in and grabbed the Republican precinct participation because it is the Republican precinct people who decide, who vote on who's going to be the leadership in the party. And the same thing is true for Democrats. I'm using Republican because 74%, right? So they vote on who's going to be the leadership of the party. They also participate in who are or what are the platforms. So when we talk about political platforms, those platforms are voted on representatively by those who have been voted into a central committee as a precinct person, who then turn around and vote for leadership, who turn around and are in the state central committee, who turn around and make other decisions. So it is representative, and it's a very, very poor numerical representation. And so what you see here is, and understand the increase from 20 to 22, the number of precinct positions, because it was a year in which there was a redistricting, was based on the number of people that were registered in a party, not by the people who had voted 2 years earlier. So except for registration, it's always based on participation. So there was a huge increase in every single county, in almost every single precinct on the number. But what you see is though there was a 300% increase in available votes, which is number of seats times the number of ballots, it only increased participation by 4 points. So we only have 70% of registered Republicans who voted in 2020. And of those that did, 40%, almost 40%, did not even vote for someone who's deeply engaged in setting what those platforms are. So what are some of the takeaways here? First of all, voting is driven, this is the last page, by candidate interest, not partisan shenanigans. This is not there's nothing, no evidence, anecdotal or otherwise, that indicates that people are changing party because they want to mess with the other party. They're changing party because there is a person they want to vote for. And as to platforms, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but this is a lot of data.
We only have about 20 minutes behind you, so
I'll finish in 2 minutes or less.
you got it. You're doing great.
So people don't even know what's on the platforms. I've talked to people who've been Republican their whole life. They don't know what's in the platform, but they know the person. And if they like a person and they believe in them and they believe in the values represented by that person and that person says they're a Republican, then they turn around and they say, well, then I must be a Republican too. And that's what's driving it. Not some unknown platform, which can be changed by people that you don't even know. Shutting down crossover will cause permanent change in affiliation. Be careful of what you ask for. You shut down party affiliation changes in the cycle, and I guarantee you that you just killed what's left of the Democrat Party, because everybody who cares about who gets elected to any office is going to change to Republican and stay there. And so then all of the talk about platform and anything else will be beside the way, because if there's one fundamental right that at least two of these bills counter, is the fundamental right to vote. And that will trump any unknown platform. Finally, the only way to eliminate crossover is to remove the incentive. And I heard somebody talk about incentive before. What is the incentive for crossover? It is to have a say in who shows up down here in the legislature, who shows up in the Capitol, who shows up in our county commission, and who shows up in our municipality. And that's what really drives us. We already have a 50% participation rate of eligible voters who are even registered at all. And then only 70% of them actually vote in each election. So the way to remove the incentive is to nominate by caucus and have qualifying primaries. So if people are dead serious about having folks who have a different ideal, a different platform view, a different morality or anything else, the way to change that is not through publicly funded elections. So my recommendation is to change the blackout from distribution of primary absentee ballots, which is normally through you that Representative Chadwick identified, which is the beginning of July, and then extend it afterwards. They absolutely kill this idea of interfering with people's fundamental right to vote, which means their fundamental right to unregister and then re-register. There is a fear based there that people will try to get around this by unregistering and then re-registering so that we can actually change. First of all, that's not what's happened in the past. And second of all, why would they bother to do that? They'll just change to begin with and then go. Otherwise, I would go with the blackout 14 days, but I think that the compromise of having the blackout period from the distribution of primary absentee ballots and the some period afterwards is the way to go, and I stand for questions.
Committee? All right, all very helpful information. Really appreciate it. It's the first time it sounds like you've presented this before to the Corporations Committee, and first time I'm seeing it, but I do appreciate it.
And Mr. Chair, on Motor Voter Act,
Yeah.
there are now only 6 states that have an exemption. There was 7, but it has to be continuous. So if you mess with the ability to register on election, you've permanently lost it. And now we would have registrations by YDOT employees instead of clerks' offices.
All right. Additional public testimony? Anyone else wishing to testify, raise your hand so I can at least get an idea. Okay. And then we'll go to the virtual world. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Committee. I'll be brief. I always like following Gail Simmons because she.
Is your microphone on?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Marguerite Herman. I'm here for the League of Women Voters, and I've testified on this issue in previous years, which is, and so I've heard Ms. Simmons' information a few times, but this is updated, so it's interesting to me as well. The League of Women Voters urges people to be informed and to vote. And the information that we hope people will seek out is information about candidates, their past, their present, what their issues are, promises, that sort of thing. And the impetus from two and partially the third of bills up consideration right now is to actually make that information pointless, go ahead and be uninformed and vote. And for that reason, the League finds this actually contrary to the civic duty. It's not just a privilege, it's a duty to vote and make that vote count, make it be a deliberate action. What we see is these bills to restrict the ability to vote for a person is to be kind of a test for party fealty, which is once again, and as mentioned previously, we view as not the informed exercise of franchise. I would say that whatever the bills achieve, it has prevented nothing in past elections to really override, and have been a fear that it would depress the will of the majority party, and it seems to not have done that as well. And what I view as these bills to restrict the ability to vote for the individual, and to frankly get up on the morning of the election and make up your mind who you're going to vote for, because as we know, a lot of times information becomes available right up until election day, and we think the voter should be able to consider those in deciding who to vote for. And Wyoming has been a place, I've lived here since 1980, and they took great pride in voting for the person. And so we think anything that depresses that is not helpful to the voter or to the offices that people are elected to. This is an unreasonable intrusion, interference with the voters' ability to carry out that sacred duty of a franchise without gaining anything in the process. There's no overriding or meaningful security that is achieved in the process. The League actually, in considering this and the overwhelming discomfort with the political change, with party changes, maybe to consider open primaries. We were, that would take this off the table, but, and I since there's not a lot of overwhelming support for that, but that's what our state board thought that would be, put all the qualified candidates up on the same ballot, and then you wouldn't have the party changing. You could vote for the top 2, would advance something like our municipal elections to the general election. So that maybe someday that would be under consideration, take the form of a bill, but right now this I think the League considers the impermissible interference with the person's exercise of a franchise, and it doesn't really answer some of the unfounded fears that people have about the primary. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Ms. Herman, committee? All right. Thank you. I think our last public testimony in the room. We moved to the virtual world. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Greg Hunter from Laramie, Wyoming. I spoke earlier that I've heard a lot about the Constitution and that we should educate people on the Constitution. There's been bills talked about this, and we need to understand these things. So I have studied some of the history. George Washington, in his farewell speech, railed against parties very, very strongly. And what I heard today was that I think what I heard today was that I have to buy the party platform before I buy the constitutional outline that a candidate would give me. That's what I heard. I have to buy the party platform first, and then I can vote. That seems really, it doesn't make any sense to me constitutionally. It just does not make any sense to me. It just kind of robs the voter of the ability to make a choice on who might best represent constitutional values going forward. So I don't understand putting party over the Constitution at all, or party platform, because that's what I heard. It makes no sense. It doesn't make any constitutional sense. It's almost like, I hear this refrain all the time, you have to pass the bill to understand what's in the bill. So I really don't get it, and I'm against all these bills that take away the right to at least see what the merchandise is before we cast a vote. So thank you very much for your time, and have a wonderful day. And I will be going to, I guess, Fort Collins to get back to Laramie. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Hunter? Thank you, Mr. Hunter.
Thank you.
Drive over here just for this?
No, I spoke this morning.
Yeah, okay, appreciate it.
Oh, I got a two for today. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you doing that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hunter.
Mr. Chairman, you have 4 hands raised in the virtual room.
All right, go ahead and let them in.
I let all 4 of them in.
Okay, as you come on in, just go ahead and light up your camera so that I can see you. And Ms. Jackson, you're first. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Elizabeth Jackson. I am the chairman of the Uintah County Republican Party, and I'm here to ask for your support of House Bill 103, or I guess 141. We do support the longer cutoff period being before the candidate filing period. Party nominations are supposed to be nominations for specific parties and not general nominations based off of personalities or relationships. There are 2 main arguments that we hear when it comes to crossover bills. The first is that this doesn't happen in Wyoming, or that it doesn't happen often enough for it to make a difference in any election. If that's the case, then there's no harm in passing this bill. The people have been asking for this for years, and you can like it or not and agree with the reasonings or not, but you can't deny that trust in our elections is falling. This bill would help to repair that trust a little bit and prove to the people of Wyoming that we care about our election security, integrity, and fairness. So the benefits of this bill would greatly outweigh the harms if that is the case. The second argument is that there is no candidate to vote for on my party's ballot in my area, so therefore I don't get to vote. It's true that there are many election districts within Wyoming that tend to be one-party areas. The solution to this is for the parties to step up and do their jobs. It's the party's responsibility to legitimately expand their influence and recruit candidates to run for office. The answer should never be to jump ship and to interfere with another party's nomination process and dilute their votes. Saying that you don't get to vote simply because there isn't a candidate listed on your ballot is untrue. You always have the option to write in a candidate if you so choose. We think that this bill is a great step towards securing the integrity of our primary elections. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would urge you guys to support House Bill 103, and I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Jackson? All right, thank you, Ms. Jackson, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Mr. Lang, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman Olson. Can I be heard? I'm not sure I'm being heard. I will proceed as though I am. So my name is Mr. Lang. I'm Pastor Lang from Evanston, Wyoming. I'm not speaking as a pastor or the leader of the Pastors Network at this point. I'm speaking from somebody from Choose Liberty Now, which is a nonpartisan citizen group here in Uintah County. And I want to talk about a principle that has not yet been articulated today. And begin by just noting that there is an inequity in Wyoming statute between the minor parties and the major parties. The Constitutional Party, the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, they are all statutorily allowed to choose candidates for the November ballot as they see fit, whether it's by caucus or what other method. But the Democrat Party and the Republican Party are not. So this is an inequity between parties, and it points to something that it's a principle that has, I think, been forgotten. At least it's not been articulated anywhere in this hearing. And the principle is that Congress shall make no law respecting the freedom of assembly. This is a freedom of assembly issue, and that is to say that the government should not be interfering in the internal party decisions about what candidates they wish or do not wish to place on the ballot in November. The whole reason for having political parties is that citizens can band together and strengthen their position by working in concert as friends in order to get particular candidates on the ballot. And so since we have a statutorial inequity between the minor parties and the major parties, it seems to me that the best way that this committee can approach the problem is to simply defer to the will of the parties as the Constitution would have us. And so it's pretty clear that the GOP anyway would prefer to have this and have no testimony that the Democrats would not. And this is a way that it lets each party to deal with their own candidate and put their own candidate on. And so I would speak in favor of House Bill 103 and 141. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. Lang? All right, thank you, Mr. Lang, for your, Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lang, would you support removing the party structure in our statute so parties still go back to caucusing and have a different format of how candidates appear on the general election ballot?
Yes, in principle. Mr. Chairman Yin, excuse me, Representative Yin, yes, in principle, I would support that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lang. Ms. Aguiar, you're next.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Good. I wasn't able last time. Hello, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dr. Cheryl Aguiar. I am calling as a citizen, and I'm also calling in to support HB 103 and 141, but not support HB 207. I am one of 3 of the committee of applicants on the initiative called Restricting Political Party Changes for Primary Elections. This initiative has been certified and is in motion by the Secretary of State's office. Basically, it's a bill, and I can go over what an initiative is very quickly. An initiative.
Ms. Aguirre, let's stay on the bill.
Okay, the initiative is exactly pretty much like bills HB 103 and HB 141, maybe not as complicated as that. As they are, it's very simple. It's people have to, cannot change their party after May 1st of a primary year. If you do not pass these bills, I guess, HB 103 or 141, just exactly as they are, we will be continuing with the initiative. This does not require approval by the legislature, the Secretary of State, or the governor. It is a we the people action. And like I said, if HB 207 is passed instead of the other ones, we will continue forward with our initiative. We will hold the line on this. I agree with what Biffy Jackson said in a further testimony, in that this does not preclude anybody from voting for whoever they want to vote for. This is only in the primaries. It is your constitutional right to vote for whoever you want to vote for, but that can be done in the general election. The primary is for parties. If you want to go to caucus, again, I too would approve of that. I've lived in caucus states. It's a robust and very, I don't know, I think that would maybe be the best idea for us. But for now, this crossover voting, I do have some numbers actually, since the other person, an earlier testimony went over quite a bit of the numbers. And it's interesting because I have a lot of the same numbers that person had, but I interpret them completely different. And that's the fun part of statistics, right? Although none of what she mentioned, nor what I'm going to talk about, are statistics. They're simply numbers. Basically, in 2018, Secretary of State Gray talked about these numbers quite a bit. 12,500 Wyoming voters changed their party affiliation in the 2018 primary. 6,000 were Democrats and 4,000 were unaffiliated, and these all became Republicans so they could vote in the primary. In 2022, we didn't get as thorough of I asked for it, but I didn't get it. As Secretary of State Gray mentioned, it was a very complicated and extensive project they did for 2018, but in 2022, I was denied that, which is fine. But from the best numbers we could come up with from the Secretary of State's office was in 2022, from July 1st, 2022 to September 1st, 2022, 13,014 Democrats left the Democrat Party and became Republicans. 8,059 unaffiliated voters joined the Republican Party. Only 8,000, another bullet, different bullet, only 8,201 Democrats cast their ballots in the 2022 primary, compared to 25,526 in the 2020 and 19,459 in 2018. So basically, a lot of Democrats left the Democrat Party and registered as Republicans after July 1st in 2022 so that they could vote in the Republican primary. And you can think, we can't get in people's heads. No, we can't know why they might have done that. I know from talking to several friends why they did it, and it was so that they could have a voice in the candidates. They are Democrats. They have Democrat values. They believe in the Democrat platform. I'm a Republican. I believe in the Republican platform and the Republican values. And I believe when they cross over to vote in my primary and get the Republican ballot, what they're doing is essentially choosing the most moderate of the Republicans on there. Can't blame them. I mean, they are a minority in this state. So that is the best they can do. But to say they're doing it just because they want to, they're trying to vote for the best candidate. Well, sure, I guess they're trying to vote for the best Republican candidate for them, at least the most Democrat Republican that they can come up with. So we're done with this. Like I said, if you don't pass it, we will have it on the ballot, or we will try anyway. So you've tried for 3 straight years. 2019 was, 4. Senate File 0160 died in committee. 2020 HB 02209 died in committee. 2021 HB 0234 was never considered for introduction. And then last year, Senate File
Hey, Cheryl.
0097
Cheryl,
also failed. So
can you?
the other
can you
person
hear
got
me?
like 20 minutes, so I'm
Well, they
kind of
do,
gonna.
but we only have 12 minutes remaining. So if you want us to take
Okay.
action on any of
Yeah,
these
well,
bills, you have to bring it to a close. Can
I
you
will.
please? Thank you.
Okay. So like I said, I am against HB 207 and I am completely for 0141 and with 103, as they will save me a lot of effort and a lot of time. I will stand for questions.
Committee questions? All right. Thank you, Cheryl. And I've said it before, I give my preference to the in-person testimony. So I know Thermopolis is a ways away, but I guarantee if you were here in person, you'd have a lot more time. So just something to think about in the future. That's all. Thank you for your comments and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I have to close public comment. Oh, you have one more? Oh, Laura, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Please please cover anything that is new or different. We only have 11 minutes remaining, so if you want us to take action on any of these bills, we need some time to work them.
Mine's going to take like 1 minute.
You're awesome. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Olson and committee members. I would ask for an aye vote on HB 103 or HB 141. We need to curb crossover voting in Wyoming. I personally know 3 people that say they were a Republican for a day in this last election. This is truly a problem in our state. And then also, I find it hard to believe the crossover voting doesn't affect down ballot votes. And that's it. Thank you for taking my testimony.
Whoa, that was less than a minute. Good job. Committee, questions for Laura? All right, thank you. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
And with that, now I will close public comment. I'm assuming I don't have anybody else online. Okay.
Mr.
Closing
Chairman.
public comment.
I move House
Represent-
Bill 103.
Okay. Moved by Representative Knapp, House Bill 103, seconded by Representative Ahmed. Any amendments on page 1 of this bill? Amendments to page 2. Amendments to page 3.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harshman?
Mr. Chairman, just an idea, I think, listening to testimony and just kind of thinking how this deal works and really normal kind of average people, not us politicians, but I mean, I think this, and it was brought up earlier in committee about tying this to when the absentee ballot deadline is, I think, or that first day. And I believe that's 45 days before the primary. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman? That's my question. Okay, so Mr. Chairman, on page 3, I think I can do this in that paragraph A, which is the primary election now, and it'd be on line 2. And I'm actually looking at the bill I marked up was 141, but I think they're identical. Is that right? Yeah. So on page 2 or page 3, line 2, after the word clerk. And I just want to run this. I think this works on or before 45 days before the primary election. And then you would delete after clerk the rest of 2, 3, and 4. So it'd simply move it instead of 80 some days or whatever that is in that statute, 22.5/209. I think it's 86 days or something. I just looked at it, but this would move it to about 45 days so people can, when they're finally starting to pay attention, they're going to have to substantially, month and a half before the primary, make that change, which I think is reasonable. So that's my amendment.
Oof. All right, moved.
Second.
Seconded by Representative Chadwick. I think it's our mics just happen to be close enough together, maybe.
Okay.
Barbara, did you get that amendment? All right. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a bit confused by the honor before language. Should it just be 45 days? Because would honor before leave the clerks the discretion to say, we're gonna call it January 1st? So just a friendly amendment to the
Okay.
amendment to say 45 days, not honor before.
Right.
Sure. I think that works.
Okay, sounds like it's friendly. All right, any other discussion on this amendment? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Back on the bill. Any other amendments on page 3? Okay. Barb, will you please do a roll call vote on House Bill 103?
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson.
Aye.
Representative Harshman.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Newsom. Representative Ottman.
Aye.
Representative Wiley, excused.
Excused.
Representative Yin.
No.
Chairman Olson.
Aye.
So we have 7 ayes, 1 no, 1 excused. Do pass with amendments.
All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to move House Bill 207.
Okay. House Bill moved 207 and seconded by Representative Yin. Any amendments to page 1 of this bill? Amendments to page 2? Amendments on page, page 3?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harshman?
I'd move a similar amendment on, I think it's on line 13 is where I'd do that. Is that correct on the, it would be 45 days instead of 14.
Okay. We have a second, is that a second?
No, just a clarification.
There's no clarification, there's only discussion after it's been seconded. Is it seconded down here? Okay, now you can discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask when we say, when the 45, it says not less than, do we want to get rid of the not less than 45 day? Not less than?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's the amendment.
No, excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Okay, if we take out 14 and put 45, then it says, and filing it with the county clerk not less than 45 days.
That is the amendment. Yep. Okay, further discussion on the amendment? All right, question on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
All right, I think that amendment has failed. Any additional amendments on page 3?
I don't think so.
Amendments on page 4. All right. Barb, will you please do a roll call vote on HB 207?
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson. Representative Harshman. Vice Chairman Knapp.
No.
Representative Newsom. Representative Ottman.
No.
Representative Wiley, excused.
Excused.
Representative Yin. Chairman Olson.
Aye.
5 aye, 3 no, 1 excused.
All right.
And I think that's a due pass.
It's a due pass. Okay, committee, we are adjourned.